Good evening. So you're all very welcome to this webinar this evening around how to become a sports performance analyst. My name is David Nolan and I'm the program lead and one of the lecturers on the Masters in Sports Performance Analysis here at the Portobello Institute. So very briefly, I won't talk much about myself. My own background, to give you some context, I'm a sports scientist and a researcher. I'm currently just completing my PhD towards the tail end of it now, where my research focuses on sex differences in adaptation to exercise. So fundamentally looking at, do males and females need to train differently? And I look at that through the lens of women's rugby. So as I said, I'm the program director on the Masters here in Sports Performance Analysis, and I'm going to be hosting this tonight. But you're lucky you won't have listened too much to me because we have some great guests tonight that I'll talk about in a little while. But first of all, I just want to say that we do offer a range of sports courses here at the Portobello Institute. We have degree programs in physical education and sports science, and then the one that I look after and one we'll probably discuss most this evening, the Masters in Sports Performance Analysis, which we've designed to give students both the theoretical and the practical tools to build a career in sports performance analysis, and not just in elite sport, as you'll even hear Owen talk about this evening. There are several different career trajectories these type of qualifications will give you, and our speakers tonight will give you some insights into that. So firstly, we'll have Owen Byrne speak about his experience as a student and what he's gone on to do with his qualifications. Following that, we've Danielle Prescott, and she's the Academy Scout for Manchester United, and she will speak about her role and the role that performance analysis plays in that. And finally, then we'll have our very own Joe Shaw, who will discuss some of the technical aspects of what would be involved if you are interested in learning more and possibly undertaking one of our courses here. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand you over now to Owen Byrne. So he is currently working with RT Sport and works in terms of sports analysis and in the production side of things across a range of sports, and probably most notably the United Rugby Championship then as well. So I'll hand you across now to Owen.
Thanks very much, David, and very welcome to everybody here. Delighted to be asked to come back and speak to the college that helped me do so much. I suppose I'll start off by saying my name's Owen Byrne, as David just said, and I'm currently the lead producer for Irish Productions, who look after RT Sports rugby coverage at the moment, and that's my main remit at the moment. And I suppose when I start there, you have to work all the way back to how the hell did I get there, and it's been an incredible, I suppose, 6 years myself, my own growth in the industry. But I suppose this started going all the way back to when I came out of school. Like many people, like many young lads and ladies, women in particular, in this country, we're very fond of sport, and I was crazy about sport my entire life, and that was a massive advantage for me. It helped me create a lot of competitiveness, and just something to delve into with my leadership skills and figuring out how to work with teams and stuff like that, which becomes so important. You don't even realize when you're a kid how important these things are further in life and how important I found them to be. But I suppose academically, that's the one positive side. Academically, I did struggle though. I would never have considered myself the most academic. Every parent-teacher meeting, my father would come home and say, you're doing fine, but you need to shut up. You're talking too much. You're too involved with sports. You love your PE, which was great. But in terms of as a kid and building towards CAO and stuff like that, and points and leaving cert, junior cert, all that sort of stuff, I wouldn't say I was left behind, because I wasn't that far off the pace, but I just always found it hard to retain information when it related to. I remember a quote that I gave. I would remember a lot more about the GA Championship than I would Hamlet or algebra, and that was very true for me, and it's true for a lot of people. So when I came out of college, didn't have enough points to do the degree program I wanted to do in DCU. So the next best thing for me was business and NCI, National College of Ireland. I did that for 2 years. I really enjoyed it actually. And one of the mantras I've always had is trial and error, and just not stopping trying things. And it's helped me so much. So when I was in NCI in my first year, did a J1, it was a great experience. The second year then is where the whole degree change came for me. I did a lot of work with St. Vincent de Paul over the summer. I stayed back for the summer. I didn't travel, and had the opportunity to work with St. Vincent de Paul in Sunshine House, and ended up working with a lot of children there. It was an incredible summer. and something I can't recommend enough to people to volunteer. And I'll talk about that as I go further, the importance of internships and volunteering and having to put in that hard graft. And the opportunity to run the sports camps just really showed me that summer that business wasn't going to be for me, and I had to change. And that's a big step to do. You're in the middle of a degree. You're only a couple of years from passing, to having that piece of paper and being able to move on. But I just knew for the rest of my life I didn't want to do that as my job. So as I said, didn't have enough points to do the DCU degree course, sports science. Portobello had just opened up, and I was part of the first year of the degree program. And I remember going to the launch day, and it was in Crow Park, and it was just incredibly exciting. And I jumped at the opportunity to do it. And it's kind of that since then, it has really just led me along this path. So did the degree program, loved it, was definitely more fond of the sports science side than the sports therapy side. I knew I was going to follow that path pretty much the first couple of months of the degree program, and continue there. So same again, the first summer I stayed home, I continued volunteering for St. Vincent de Paul. I began coaching in my club, which was hugely important for my growth and my opportunity to test out what I was learning, especially with the analytical side. And then the second year, I managed to get involved with Air Sports. They had a launch day that I got invited to on a whim. And I remember they were discussing launching a sports program. They had lots of sports stars there. And I remember the head of production spoke at the day, and I just said, this is something I need to try. And again, that trial and error mentality, that never being afraid, I went straight up to him, never forget it. And I asked him to how I'd get in the building, how I would get into this industry. And it was they brought me to a Shamrock Rovers Bohemians launch day, a show. Sat in the truck, saw how it worked, and knew that this is what I wanted to do. I'd finally found my passion. I got to talk to people about sport. They gave me an 8-hour-a-week internship. I was probably doing the best part of 20 hours a week on top of having a college job and doing the degree. I was working at the Odeon Cinema. That was my college job, another important thing. But the internship was unpaid, and I put in more work, I'd say, than I ever have up to that point in my life. I was just so engrossed with it. And to be perfectly honest, it was probably detrimental to my academic side. I was so obsessed with this, and my in was the analytical side. Straight away, it was the first thing that stood out for me, and that made me, I suppose, attractive for them in terms of they could bring someone in who could look after their pundits analysis, who they could trust, who knew what he was doing. And it was just such a huge advantage for me. I just bypassed so many people because of my sporting background, my passion. I mean, you can probably hear me now. I even thinking back, I loved every second of it. And so, you're working with pundits like Neil Lennon and Chris Sutton, and further down the line when I got to RTE, some amazing names again, Dunphy, Damien Duff, etc. And you're trying to hold court with them and talk about certain tactical analysis. And I'm sure Danielle will be able to help us delve into a bit more of that on the club side of stuff. But on the TV side, it's hugely important. And the pressure of live TV, the time in live TV, you have to be able to cope with all that. So the internship went really well. It was offered to come on board then as a freelance sort of assistant producer. Worked on all their coverage then. Managed to then because I was playing Gaelic football at the time at my club, I actually didn't have enough time to commit to our senior team. So then what I started doing as part of my final year degree was using some of the sports analysis stuff, filming games, showing it back. And on a whim, again, trial and error, like I said, having that no fear mentality. Somebody in the club was involved in RTE, heard what I was doing, heard what I was doing with the club and what I was doing with Air Sport. And they said, well, if you're doing that for free, you may as well come make money in RTE. So got in RTE, and same again, you worked your way up through there. The academics or the analysis side again helped me so much just to break down those barriers and move forward and show that I was competent and that I really cared. And worked on a Sunday game highlight show for a summer. 18 months, brilliant. Was the head analysis producer for the World Cup. Again, looking after all the analysis every day. You'd be in at 6 a.m. till about 10, 11 p.m. How quickly you get your work done. And you're working with the likes of Damien Duff and Eamon Dunphy, Richie Sadlier, all these people you watch or used to watch. And that was incredible. End of that came, and then Air Sport came knocking, got a full-time job, which is very hard to do in this country. There's not a huge amount of broadcasters that offer full-time work. And then the growth just happened, and it just kept moving along. COVID was a barrier for sure. And I do link back to again, at that stage when I made the producing role, the ability then to implement what I wanted to. Again, it's so much passion for sport and analysis. I'm a big American sports fan. I want to implement that to Irish public, and we started doing that on Air Sport. We brought in someone like Murray Kinsella on our rugby coverage, who was nearly an anorak. He's so amazingly engrossed in his rugby analysis, and that was a huge thing that we brought forward. We did an analysis midweek show on it, which was fantastic that he did. And then COVID happened, and Air Sport was disbanded, unfortunately. But since then, I've moved on to the rugby coverage with RTE. In between that, I did the Olympics, and these are all insane stuff. But if I didn't have that one thing that made the difference for me when I went into air, who would know where I'd be? I'd probably still be working my way up. And now at 28 years old, I'm producing. It's crazy to even think of from when I started, but in 5.5 years, I'm producing probably the second or third biggest rights deal in the country. And that's coming out of the Portobello Institute and giving me that background in sport and the passion and also the knowledge that I could just go for it. That the one thing I had, I never forget that quote that my granddad gave me, that he said, if you could work in sport one day, you'd be doing well, because I wouldn't be able to tell him about school, but I could tell him about how many goals Ronaldo got, or like the Dublin defensive system, and I suppose Leinster's forward pack, all this stuff, which would stick in my mind as a kid. And I'm able to implement it now in the conversations I get to have on a daily basis. I mean, a lot of them are about cameras and all this stuff. But when you get to the show day and you get to go to Thomond Park and you get to sit in that seat and talk to Peter Stringer and whoever else these people are, you get to implement your ideas. And it all came back from when I went to college, and I made that decisive decision to change my degree. It was the best decision I've ever made. Portobello has grown a lot more even since I've been there. I've kept in touch with everybody there, so I'm so delighted to be on this and be able to share my story. It's a unique path for sure. I don't think it's for everybody. I had to probably give up about 2.5 years of my life and social life and all that stuff, and to get along you have to give a lot, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. But the main thing that I take away from it, and I feed back to the young lads I coach in my club now and people that talk to me, is get involved in places, whether it's when Danielle talks about Man United, and her story is probably similar in terms of giving up that free time, trying to learn. Like, I'm a self-taught editor. I got thrown in an edit bay one day and they said, this is how you're doing in, this is how you're doing out, have at it, figure it out. And that's the way a lot of these places work. People don't have time to tell you these things, but if you're willing to sit there and be a sponge and soak it in and have that passion, you'll go a long way, and you'll make a huge impact. I know I'm rambling on here now for 10 minutes, so I don't want to keep going, but that would be my main thing, is volunteering your time and trying everything. Don't just stick with something. Like, I hate that saying you only live once, but it's very true. Like, don't just sit there and be content with rambling through the motions and think, I could have done that. Like, I have such a passion for sport, but like, there's so many avenues in sport nowadays. Like, I really thought what I was going to do was work in a club. That was like what I was, when I did this degree course, I was like, I would love to work with a club. I'd love to be an analyst. I'd love to look how team formations are set and all that sort of stuff. And there's times I got to do that in my job now, but I would never change my job for the world now. Like, sports TV, production, broadcasting, that live energy of you've got a million things to do. I have to like key a presenter and tell a director where we're going next, and the graphics operator to fire this graphic, and X, Y, and Z, and pundits analysis. And like, you're leading teams of 40, 50 people every day at a stadium, and it's insane. Like, it's absolutely insane. I wish I could stick a GoPro on my back and you guys could come watch me and just see how bonkers it is, because it all started with a sports science degree and wanting to do that. Or I always say, if I ever left this job, which who knows, I might, I'm only 28. Am I going to do this for the next 32 years? I don't know. But I'd love to be a PE teacher. It was a huge passion of mine. And that's, again, going back to when I volunteered for St. Vincent de Paul, that was the thing that set it off for me, was coaching kids and seeing the love and the joy that sport brought me and other kids. So yeah, that would be my main takeaways, is trial and error. Don't be afraid. Like, you really do, like, time will fly by quick, especially in that degree course. Like, and it opens up so many avenues. Like, you can do that sports science, physical education degree, if it's the sports therapy side of it. You can go and do a master's, or you can get out and try and work and travel and see the opportunities that sport can bring, because that's why we're all here. That's why you're probably listening to this now, is because you have a passion for sport. And TV is just one of the insanely incredible industries that branches out because of sport. So that's really all I have to say about that. If you have any questions, please feel free at the end. I know we're doing a Q&A. to give us a shout. But that's about all I have to say for the moment. I can't say how good an avenue Portobello is. I'm an obvious example of it, that you start in one way and you take it and run with it and see where you end up. So I appreciate you listening to me, and hopefully my story was somewhat insightful for you.
That's brilliant, Owen. Thanks very much. And what a brilliant story, I must say. Because even at 28, to hold your position at 28 is probably, if we compare it to maybe other countries, is relatively unprecedented. I'd say people take a lot longer to climb to a similar position in other countries. And I think that the main lessons personally I take away from it there is the bravery, first of all, to make that jump. Because I think people, it's sunk cost fallacy, I think would be the right term, that just because you're a year or two into it, people are inclined to just keep going, even if they know maybe instinctively it's the wrong thing to do. So at least you have the bravery to jump. And then the other aspect, which I often give advice to students, is you just kept putting yourself out there. And that's what you need to do. If you keep raising the head up enough, like what do you call it, meerkats standing up, eventually people will notice. And then, as you said, you were self-taught, you had the skills that when you were given the opportunity, you were able to walk the walk. You probably had imposter syndrome for a lot of it and felt like you were drowning, but you had the bravery to get stuck in. So that's brilliant. So if any of you guys do have questions for Owen, you can stick them in the chat and we'll come back to them at the end. But again, thank you very much, Owen. I'm sure people will have questions for you shortly. So coming up next, I'm going to hand over to Danielle Prescott. So Danielle is the Academy Scout for Manchester United, and she's going to talk about her role and the role that performance analysis has played in that career. So I'll hand over to you now, Danielle.
Thank you, David. First off, thank you to everyone at the Portobello Institute for inviting me along to this, because it's nice to be able to share different experiences and the different journeys that people have gone on, because by no means the route that I took is the right route for everyone. But it's one example of how someone has done it. And if there's something that you can take from that, then by all means do that. So probably similar to Owen, really, in the sense of where it all began. Football has very much been the main dominant sport in my life, and it was sort of that really that sparked my interest in terms of trying to pursue a career in it. And I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's the thing that I knew I wanted to do from a very early age. For me, sport was just something that I really enjoyed, and it was something I tried to be involved in at school, and not just football. I tried to obviously be part of as much sport as possible. But football for me was the predominant thing that sort of drove to where I am now, especially. But what I would say is that, and similar to some of the comments that were posted online from the interview for Portobello, that I grew up in quite a football rich town, if you will, in terms of in Blackburn, which we might have some fans in the room, we might not, probably not, but it's something that sort of piqued my interest in terms of, we were sort of around that golden era of in the Premier League, and I was very fortunate that I think I would have been about 8 or 9 at the time that I actually saw Blackburn win the Premier League. So I was part of a very special era in terms of football and for my hometown anyway. But then going on, sport never really left me. It carried on through my sort of younger years and teenage years, and I continued playing football right up until I physically could, which was probably around 2021. And I received an injury that didn't necessarily take me out of the game. I broke both my ankles, which seems like it would take me out of the game, but it actually wasn't the injuries that stopped me from playing. It was more the psychological impact of being worried about going in for tackles and just that fear of being re-injured again. So eventually playing football wasn't the thing that I continued to do, but it had been part of my life for that long that I knew it was sort of a potential career avenue, and that's where I wanted to go. So obviously from my university education, I studied a sports coaching degree, which at the time, performance analysis wasn't standalone. It was always usually embedded within programs like sports coaching or sports development or sometimes sports science. So it was something that you could kind of just pick up, and it wasn't necessarily something that you could specialize in terms of actually getting that on your degree certificate. And I really sort of took to it in my second year at university, and it was the thing that I wanted to do. And at that time, performance analysis was relatively new. So you didn't need to have a lot of experience to be classified as experience. I would probably say if you've been had 2-3 years experience under your belt, you'd be classified as quite experienced and quite senior at that point. Whereas now, obviously, that the bubble has burst as such, and it's absolutely exploded. So there's different avenues that now offshoot off performance analysis. But at the time, I think I was very much riding the crest of a wave, and it was an opportunity that I could take because there wasn't many people that knew too much about it. There wasn't many people that sort of had the experiences that I was able to take. And I was very fortunate as part of my undergraduate degree that I was able to go off and get some experience at my actual home club. So I did a bit of experience at Blackburn. I did a little bit of work at Preston North End, but the main work I did was at Bolton Wanderers. So that allowed me to sort of go into the academy and work with the academy analysts. And at that time, because it was quite a long time ago now, it was back in 2007, 2008, Bolton were actually in the Premier League with Blackburn. So the experience of being around the academy wasn't just like Bolton Academy now would be, because you were also in the same vicinity as first team players. They were all together in the same building. So you had that constant experience of just being in and around people that were at that elite level, and people that potentially are already at the stage that you want to go to. So being in that environment and being surrounded by really good people and people that you can learn a lot from was something that I took as a potential 19, 20-year-old. And I wouldn't necessarily say that, because one thing that often gets asked to me is, do you sort of feel anything, because obviously you're female? I wouldn't necessarily say that I felt anything like that. I think people were very much open-minded about the fact that, regardless of gender, for example, you still have something to offer, and it's kind of that's as far as it goes, and you just be treated like everybody else. And I think I have been very fortunate from that perspective so far in my career, that it's not been a massive issue and it hasn't really halted anything. The only negative experience I had from that was that I did want to apply for a job, and I was prepared to go to interview, and then they saw my name at the top. So they saw that I was female, and they didn't offer the interview. That is the only negative aspect I've had over the past 16, 17 years, which is probably not that bad considering the number of clubs that I've sort of been in and around. So that experience at Bolton as an undergrad was the thing that sort of propels me to obviously rack up even more experience. So as Owen said in his talk, the position for me at Bolton was voluntary. It was part of my undergraduate programme. I think at the time they covered sort of my petrol allowance, and we got some free kit. And I was all right with that. I was more than happy, because I was quite happy that I'd been given the opportunity, let alone to be getting any freebies or making sure that my costs were covered. So that really propelled me into making sure that this is the thing that I want to do. So I want to work in performance analysis, or I at least want to be in that club setting where I can get potential opportunities and try and excel in this a little bit. What then happened was, this was in my final year of my undergraduate degree. And as I said at the beginning, because performance analysis at the time was relatively new, it was obviously becoming bigger from a university perspective as well. So from a teaching and learning point of view, and understanding that if there's something happening here, so if performance analysis is getting bigger, we essentially need to provide the education to educate the analysts. And what that did was it offered another opportunity that I didn't even think about. But I genuinely believe I was in the right place at the right time, the university that I graduated from recognised this, and they offered me a role as a demonstrator, which basically means that I would oversee anything sort of performance analysis related from a student and a staff perspective. I would teach students and staff how to use the softwares that were needed and implemented. And any students that go out on placements or internships that in the remit of performance analysis would sort of fall underneath me. So this isn't an avenue that I thought about or even wanted to pursue, but getting that opportunity in higher education opened a door that, like I said, never even crossed my mind. And it was probably because at one point it didn't even exist. But once it did, and I was able to sort of have the security of employment within education, but still practice the skills of a performance analyst, it kind of felt like I got the best of both worlds. I got the security, but also I could still do what I wanted to do, but just in a slightly different environment. And that fitted for me really well. And what it did is it actually opened my eyes to teaching and wanting to teach in this area, and actually seeing, well, actually I can instill some of this knowledge and some of this experience into students. And one thing I didn't do is think, because I feel like I've sort of got a career now, and it might be in a slightly different path that I originally set out, I didn't stop learning. So I didn't stop trying to be that performance analyst or trying to get experiences of how analysts work in clubs. Because if I'm teaching someone how to do that, I need to feel assured that what I'm teaching them is coming from someone who's been there and done that. So that was one thing I was keen to do. Yeah, I was keen to obviously continue with the demonstrator post, but I also wanted to actively still pursue being a performance analyst, so essentially a practitioner. And I was able to do that. And that's something that I wanted to get across to students that I taught or staff that I trained up. It was that I'm not telling you this because I think this will happen. I'm showing you this and I'm telling you this because I know it will happen. I've seen it happen. And I think that's really important, because it can be very different being told how to do something by theorists and standalone researchers, but there's something different about being out there in the field. And it's kind of like when people talk about theory to practice, they're two different things, and ideally you want them to merge together, but sometimes it just doesn't. So having that sort of applied practitioner background is something I felt was really important to be able to do just my demonstrator role in the best way that I could. As a result of that, I was then sort of offered more of a teaching role. So I moved up to an associate lecturer. So I moved more into teaching and away from demonstrating. But my teaching was sort of more going into the theoretical side of performance analysis. So I'd now sort of crossed that barrier of taking my practitioner-based experiences, looking at what literature and research says about it, and seeing whether that fits with my own experiences or other people's, because I wasn't shut off to the fact that everyone's got different experiences. Everybody comes from different backgrounds and settings and different opportunities, and that's just as important. So I wanted to try and get that merge and the balance right for anybody that I was teaching or anyone that I was coming across, really. And whilst I was in my employment at the first university that I was employed with, which is where I graduated from, I got the opportunity to do some work with Fleetwood Town. Fleetwood Town were quite local to the university that I was at. And we'd initially set up for some students to go there and do some placements. But I'm usually not very happy with that. I try and get something for myself from these as well, because for me, building your networks, building your connections, and gaining as much experience as possible is invaluable. So at the time, the manager at Fleetwood was Mickey Mellon, and I managed to secure a consultant analyst role with the first team. So he was the manager, I was the analyst for him at Fleetwood. So I'd go to all the games, record all the games. We sort of, at the beginning, because you've got to kind of get to know your manager in terms of what type of things they'd like to look for. So we had to have the initial discussions to decide, what is it you're actually looking for at half time. And there wasn't too much, in fairness. But what it did is it allowed me to unplug the laptop, run across the pitch, go into his office at half time, show him what he wanted to see. And then obviously he still had enough time then to go back into the dressing room to the players and relay the messages based on the footage that I'd shown him, but also the things that he had seen himself from the pitch anyway. And this continued for a good season. And then Mickey left Fleetwood Town and he took a post at Shrewsbury. And I got asked if I wanted to go with him to Shrewsbury. So I continued at Shrewsbury again at first team. But then on the odd occasion, I'd get sent to do slightly different tasks. So sometimes I'd get sent to games to watch the opponents that we might be playing the week after. So I'd now transitioned from a performance analyst to an opposition analyst, because I'm looking at who we will be coming up against next week or the week after. And trying to identify points that can be made that can then obviously be put through in the training sessions to look out for, or things that we can actually exploit within that team. And there'd be certain common patterns of play that we could report. So there was a game in particular that I do remember watching, and every single time the goalkeeper played the ball to the exact same player, regardless of where they were standing, it was always to that same player. They could be absolutely hounded by the opposition, but it was always going to that one player. And noticing common patterns of play like that is something that they obviously valued, because if you're going to do it in one game, your chances are you're going to do it again. So it allowed us that insight of being able to try and counteract that, or how can we stop them from doing that and being so predictable, because essentially that's what you're trying to do. And if there are analysts out there that start to look at what oppositions do, then they should also be thinking, well, they now know what we do, so we need to change our practice. So you're kind of sort of double bluffing and triple bluffing all the time to try and get the better of each other. So I started doing these opposition reports, and then on the odd occasion I'd get sent to watch some players. So it had now sort of moved into a little bit of recruitment, and that's not really anything I'd actually thought about before. One thing I noticed between the roles is that completing an opposition report takes a lot of time, especially if you're working with the first team. So because it was first team, typically the 3 o'clock kickoffs. So if you go into an away fixture, that's your travel time there, sit through the game, which is in the middle of the day, obviously then drive back home, do your report, and you could either sacrifice your entire Saturday night. And when I say Saturday night, you would be up till the early hours of the morning. So you could have a Sunday, or you would say, I'm going to have a Saturday evening, but I'll sacrifice my Sunday. If I was going out to watch players, however, I'd still have the travel time, etc. But when I came home, it might take me an hour and a half to do the report, and that would be done. So from a work-life balance perspective, it just suited me better. Especially obviously if you've got family and commitments, it's a lot of strain on them as well. So if you can get that balance right, then it does make a lot of difference. So what happened then was Mickey ended up moving on to Tranmere Rovers, and again I got asked to go with him, but because I'd had an opportunity of doing something slightly different, I actually asked if I could just sit on the recruitment side rather than the analysis side. And at this point, I've been doing it for quite a number of years now. So it kind of felt like it was within the remit to actually try something a bit different. And that request was granted. That wasn't a problem. So I now just sort of went out to look for players that potentially we could sign. So I get sent to local fixtures even. So Preston v Blackpool, or sometimes I'd go to Premier League 2 fixtures. So it might be Manchester United under 23s against Blackburn 23s. And the difference with this is that you're at a game that you might be sat next to a Man United scout or a Man City scout, Chelsea scout, But for me, when I was at Shrewsbury, they're looking for a different player than what we are. And that's largely because of money. We can't afford the players that they can. We don't have the pull that they have as a club. So trying to shift your mindset of not looking for the best player on the pitch, but maybe looking for the third or fourth best player on the pitch because actually they're in your price range is quite difficult. And it's difficult to transition because you automatically are looking for the best. But then in reality, you can't afford the best. The Man Cities, the Man Uniteds, the Chelseas can afford the best, but we couldn't. So having that experience at the different levels, for me, was invaluable. It's something that has definitely put me in good stead now, and it allows me to gauge players at different levels. It allows me to assess the levels and know the differences between them. So obviously, while this is going on, in the background, from an academic perspective, I've now moved on to another university. So I'm teaching somewhere else now at another university in the Northwest. And I've now become a program lead for a master's program in analysis. So again, I didn't settle, and I didn't think I've had enough experience now. I don't really need to keep doing that. It was something, as I said, that I just continued to do. So the university that I ended up moving to is actually relatively close to Manchester United. It's in Manchester, and I ended up building a partnership there for our students to go in, do some analysis work, and again, just like I did at Fleetwood, I took the opportunity for myself. And largely because with the work I was doing at Tranmere, in the particular year I'm referring to, we got to the playoffs, but we'd just not made it. We were very unfortunate. We got to the final, but we didn't get the promotion. So typically, sometimes what tends to happen is if that's going to happen, some staff will be going, and sometimes it's the manager. And I know how patterns work. I've followed Mickey everywhere, so if he's going to go, chances are I'm going to go as well. So I used my connection at Man United that I built up with the students. I'd been in and met with Tony Strudwick, who at the time was head of sports science for the academy. So he got brought in with Alex Ferguson, and Tony was the person who set up the work for our students to go in. And then from that connection, I got to meet other members of staff at United, and whether it was luck, but at the time that I went in to have that chat with someone, because that's what it was a chat with someone, it wasn't an interview, that the team that had come in to look after the academy recruitment setup had just moved across from Manchester City. So it had just timed perfectly that they were ready to come in and implement a new structure of scouts. I'd obviously talked about my experiences of moving through performance analysis into scouting and recruitment, and it being at different levels. So obviously Fleetwood, Shrewsbury and Tranmere were, at different leagues, and it just seemed a good fit. And then I was fortunate enough that obviously off the back of that conversation, and I'd sort of sold myself enough, and it wasn't a chat between one person, it was a chat in front of 3 people, and then 3 people are still at the club now that I actively work with. I was given the opportunity to be an academy scout with them. Initially, it was looking across ages 12 to 16, and then eventually there was recognition that actually we do tend to have some young players that play up in the 23s, so we might need to look at them as well. So then my age range sort of spread to 12 to 23, so it's quite a big age range. So even now, going from literally last night I was at an under 12s game, and then this weekend I'll be at an under 18s game, and then probably at some point next week I'll be at an under 23s game, and then back probably to an under 12s again. So having to alter, what you're looking for in players at those different ages, again, is just something that comes with experience and practice. But the more you see it and the more you're around it, the more you recognise the benchmarks in players. So people ask me questions about players we have at United in the academy. But that's not my interest. My interest is to look at the players we don't have, because that's ultimately what you've employed me to do, is to look at players that we don't have that we might want. So we need to know about the standard of our own players, of course, to benchmark against. But ultimately, I'd rather be an expert in the region that I'm covering. So, the players that are in the Blackburn Academy, the Preston Academy, the Man City Academy. So they're what I want to be the expert in, because ultimately, I'm not here to tell you how good or how bad the players are in our own academy. We've got plenty of people that see them every day. But you do need someone who tells you what the players are like at other clubs in the region that I cover. And that's sort of where I fit in. So on top of that, so I've always continued my career's probably been very paralleled, very practitioner based, but also very academic, and they do work really well together. And sort of, I think what sort of wraps it all together, and there are points that Owen made that sort of resonated with me, was that you have to be quite brave. So if I see a player, for example, and I choose to hesitate and think twice and think, I don't really think I should say that because I'm not really sure if they are good enough, say it. It's better that someone goes to watch them and says, no, they're not for us, than to not say anything and that player gets missed. And then you get asked the questions of, why didn't we know about this person? So it is far better to sort of put your head above the parapet, and that's what you're employed to do, so do it. And alongside that, one thing for me is that within that bravery, there's an element of resilience. That there will come a point where you get knocked back, or you get rejected, or you get told no. That's not a problem. Like, that's just part of life. But actually, those rejections, those no's, those knockbacks are the things that actually make you push back even further. And I think it helps you to push on. It certainly happened for me. But it's one of those things that you just need to keep pushing through, because essentially nobody's going to help you any more than yourself. So you need to be the one that's driving it forward. And if you get told no, you're not in any worse position. So why not just keep pushing on that door? And then what that reminds me of a little bit is you as people. I think that's sometimes a little bit underestimated, that you have to sort of build the resilience and build that thick skin and understand that actually there are some basics to being really successful. And for me, the basics are things like communicating right and making sure you get your points across, and having the bravery and the courage and the confidence to say what you need to say. And this sort of comes back to, employability. And that's actually similar to David. I'm doing my PhD and I'm due to submit it probably within the next 5 months. And it's around employability and looking at, what do we actually believe it to be? Because it's a buzzword that's said quite a lot, but very little is said about what we as individuals believe it to be. It's usually something that's pushed upon us. So that whole understanding of employability is just as important within sectors like this, because you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you can't deliver it, then what's the point? And that's kind of, I think that might be my concluding point, actually. So thank you to David, obviously, for hosting this and inviting me along, and everyone that's listening. Hopefully you've took something away from that. And as Owen said, if you've got any questions, then by all means put it in the chat and I'll do my best to answer it, or deflect in the best way possible. So thank you.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Danielle. And I think there's two main takeaways I take from it anyway. The first of all is the importance of being dynamic and fluid throughout your career. Because even from what you spoke about there, how you began your careers, maybe you didn't envision where you were going to end up, and to be able to kind of roll with those changes is important. And also, a lot of people maybe make the mistake or naive, think that they'll go into a course and go straight to working at Man United or at the very highest level, and did nearly view it as a failure if you didn't work at that level, where that's not the case at all. And the experience you get at any level is invaluable and carries right through. So get experience wherever you can, be it your local town or wherever it may be. And as you go up through the levels, those experiences will stand to you. So Thanks very much. And again, if anyone has any questions for Danielle, please put them in the comments and we will get to them very shortly. So our final speaker tonight is Jo Shaw, and she's going to talk about some of maybe the more technical aspects and some of those frequently asked questions that we usually get. So she's going to cover some of those topics now. So I think, is Jo there? Perfect. I'll hand over to Jo now.
Thanks, David, and you're all very welcome this evening. Thank you for joining us. So yeah, I'm the course advisor at Portobello Institute. So if you are interested in any of our courses, I'll probably be the first point of contact that you chat to. It's very informal initially, so if you are just interested in more information, I'll pop a link just to book a quick call with me, and that is typically how it starts. It's just a quick call. I just want to hear more about yourself. Everyone's has very different backgrounds, so I really love my job because I get to hear more about yourselves and what you've done in your past in order to bring you to this point, particularly if you're a mature learner who is looking to get back into study. We do have anatomy and physiology, a QQI level 5 in anatomy and physiology. So if you don't have a sports background, we do have alternative courses that you could do prior to possibly coming on to our degrees, and that would be our level 8. We've got our 3 level 8 degrees, BSc in sports therapy, BA in PE, and our BSc in sport and exercise science, and that would be your level 8 degree platform to start with, and then that leads on then to our MSc in sports performance analysis. And that could be a pathway that you could follow from any of those degrees. You don't have to do a specific one of those degrees in order to get into sports performance analysis. Any of those degrees could actually lead into that. So if we've actually any of our current students this evening, if you're on sports therapy and possibly want to go into the direction of sports performance analysis, that is certainly possible. And pick up the phone to me, and it's just a great way to start off the conversation of what you would like to see yourself doing in maybe 5 years' time. What career route do you want to do, and how can we help you get there, really? And then if it's any of our younger learners are here tonight, if you're in leaving cert, or if you've maybe done your leaving cert in the last year or so, then if you've studied biology, then that's brilliant. Then that's what we're kind of looking for ideally. But again, it could be the anatomy and physiology course that we also have. Could be something that you could do over summer if you are missing that science background. And then you've got your pathway into our degree programs. So yeah, initially it will be a conversation with myself. I'll just ask you a little bit more about yourself, and what you would like to do, and what the courses that we offer, and what I believe would be the best course for you, and what you would like to do long term. So yeah, certainly if it's something that you've been thinking about for a long time, book a call with myself. It'll be a telephone call, very informal. You can ask as many questions as you like, and I'll be there to help answer any questions. We have blended learning as well as full-time learning. So blended learning would be typically more weekend-based learning, and then the full-time learning would be Monday to Friday-based learning. Typically not the full 5 days, but it would be scheduled within Monday to Friday. So it just depends on yourself what would suit you best, and we can kind of take it from there. The MSc in sports performance analysis is only currently run as blended learning, so weekend learning, so suits someone perfectly if you're in full-time employment. You can do that on the weekends. So yeah, I'm certainly here for any questions. What I'll do is I'll leave my book a call with myself, and you can book a call. There should be slots available for tomorrow if you just want to pick up the phone tomorrow. I'll give you a call, or sometime next week. You can basically slot it in anytime that suits yourself. So yeah, I would just love to hear from you, hear more about your background, and how we can possibly offer you a course at Portobello Institute. I think we're going to go into a Q&A now, so if you have any questions regarding the entry process, just let me know.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Shaw. And again, Jo, just to reiterate what Jo was saying there, guys, if you're even half considering it, it's a very informal call, very friendly conversation. So do get in contact. So again, if you have any questions this evening, guys, throw it into the chat now and we'll throw them out to the speakers. So Owen, you are the lucky person that gets to go first. What's the best part of your job? Michelle Hogan asks.
God, how long have you got? There's so many parts to it, I suppose. What I like about it is no day is ever really the same. Like, live sport is so unpredictable. That'd be something I enjoy. I enjoy the ability, thank God I have it, the ability to be calm while there's absolute mayhem going on. Like if people really, as I said, like if I could put a GoPro on me for people to understand what it's really like, and having a headset on and talking to, like having 3 or 4 voices for 6 or 7 hours in your ear, and just trying to disseminate what matters and what doesn't, and what information goes to your presenter and stuff like that, and chatting about analysis and how quickly all that stuff has to get turned around. Like that's something I really enjoy. The fact that sport alone is something incredible. If I wasn't working on these games, I'd probably be watching them or at most of them anyway. So that's definitely a huge bonus. And then the people, like I grew up spending a lot of my summers in Kerry. Even though I'm a dub, not that you'd be able to tell that I spent time in Kerry, but I used to love watching Tomás O'Shea, and he was my idol growing up. Actually, like I used to write stuff in school about him, and used to wear number 5 because of him playing guard, and I loved that position. And I ended up getting to work with him for 3 years, and it was insane. And becoming a good friend of him, and still chat to him now, and I still have to pinch myself when I think of stuff like that. So there's so much about it. If I had to go back to the start, the analytical side of it was, again, not to keep tooting the horn, but that was, even listening to Danielle there and the stuff she's done, was all stuff that I envisioned myself doing, and to be able to implement any of that in my shows are just an amazing thing. So yeah, all of that, hopefully that answers it, but there's so much to it.
Brilliant. And what would you say is the best sporting moment you've been at then, if you had to choose one, or is there one you can choose?
Best sport as working wise, or in general?
Well, I suppose in general, working or in general.
2011 All-Ireland final when Dublin won it, for sure, was just absolutely bananas as an individual who was at it. But in terms of working, that's a great question. I suppose the Olympics, like to work on the Olympics, and work on. Now I got to work. I was working the daytime show, which was 9 a.m. till 3 p.m. But my day started at 5. So to work the same day that Kelly Harrington won her gold, and just the pandemonium and like emotions that were running that day, because like the Olympics is an incredible slog. It's basically especially when you're in Tokyo time, it's about 17-hour days for the best part of a month, non-stop, and everybody's running on adrenaline at that stage. But to get something like that and have the broadcast nation, and we had cameras at our parents' house and on that street, and how amazing she was, that was pretty patriotic. I'd say that has to be up there for sure.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Throw some over to you now, Danielle. The first one that someone has put in: is it necessary to have an MSc or PhD to get into a club like Manchester United?
It's a tough one, that, and the reason being is that sometimes you can get really experienced people that have built up their experience not through qualification but just through doing. The problem is that the benchmarks are constantly moving. So if that benchmark used to be you need a degree to at least be shortlisted for an interview, that benchmark, I'm fairly certain, has now changed to you need a master's to be shortlisted to get an interview. So you're essentially trying to work your way to get onto the shortlist, and that's where your qualifications come in. Because if you don't say that you have certain qualifications on a piece of paper, then there will be people that do, and they'll be the people that get shortlisted and interviewed. So it doesn't necessarily mean that your experience is any less than someone else because you haven't got an MSc or a PhD, but it has to be making sure that you get your foot through that door, and putting something like that on a piece of paper will ensure that you get onto a shortlist at least. And that's obviously the first step to then being offered the interview. So I would say it gives you an advantage to get in to the next rung on the ladder, is what I would say.
The qualifications get you past the HR screening, and then it's your ability to do the job and your experiences allow you to go on past that. The next two, I suppose, can be put together. So first of all, kind of what do you look for in a player, and then how much depth does a scout need to go to when suggesting a player to the club?
So it'll depend obviously on the club itself. So typically a club will have a certain way that they play, and you're looking for players that slot into that philosophy and the game model and how that team structures. You also might be privy to knowing that a certain age group is struggling. So you might actually need to be looking for more under 14s than you are under 18s. So it depends what you're looking for. But for me, some of the things that you're looking for in players are things that maybe aren't so obvious. So things like the discipline levels, and when things aren't going the way, what do they react like, or rather don't act like. And some of that you actually don't always see in the actual performance. You see it in the play, in the build up, so the warm up before the actual games commence, and what's their attitude like, because essentially people have to work with these players. So you don't want to be known as sort of pushing a player that's been really difficult and really hard work. So that's one of the things. But equally, it also depends on their age. You can't expect to have the finished article at 12, 13 years old. But if you're looking at someone who's 18 or in the 23s, you would expect to be there or thereabouts, because obviously they have to slot into a certain age group when they come across to a club. So it does all depend on that. In terms of the depth that you go into, we watch players multiple times. So I might have spotted someone last night at a game that I'll put a report in on. Equally, I might put reports on players that we shouldn't consider. It's important to understand also not where to spend your time, because time costs money. So you're not always putting in good reports. You're sometimes putting in, let's not keep monitoring this player right now. And someone else might go and watch that player on Saturday, and then someone else might go and watch them next week. So it's all kind of I always use the 4-corner model to go off. So I'll always use like the technical, tactical, physical, psychological, and I use that to fill my report in, because at least if I do that, I know I'm covering all bases in terms of the types of things that we'd need to know to give an overall picture of that player.
Brilliant. And this one, it's okay if you don't answer this one, because it might be some, I don't know if you'd call it intellectual property or insider secrets, but are there any players you've scouted to keep an eye on at the moment?
You were right. We do have to be careful what we say. One thing I would say is that we don't, as scouts, take full credit individually for players. Usually because of the process that I've just mentioned, which is that they're watched multiple times by multiple members of staff. And then that potentially triggers, more senior members of staff, and then they might go and watch them, and then there'll be someone even higher than them that will go and watch them. So there is a process to it, that it's not just one person's opinion, but it's multiple opinions. So it actually isn't like anything else, really, when you think about it. It's if the overall picture is looking, 90% good, let's say, from 9 out of 10 scouts, then that's quite a high percentage that people quite like that player. So that would obviously trigger what the next steps would be.
Okay, brilliant. This one for both Owen and Danielle. Do you set goals for yourself to get to where you are now? So I imagine that is, did you set goals for yourself to get to where you are now?
Do you want me to go first, Danielle?
If you want, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose, and Danielle might be able to come off the back of this as well. When you start off in an internship, it's not, I don't mean to sound degrading, but you're as low on the totem pole as you can be in that respect. Like, you're not paid, you're there, you're not bothering people, obviously you're there to learn, and if you show the enthusiasm, you can get in the door and make an impact. But if you're not, I wouldn't say rootless, but like, again, I went back to what I said earlier, like, I had to knowingly, when I started, give up everything in my life really for where I wanted to go. Like, I saw people in RTE and in Air that were just, had been in there for 5 or 6 years and hadn't really pushed on from where they were at, like the role they were at. They had no ambition to do it. And I went in there all guns blazing, and I wouldn't suggest it for everybody, but I do think you have to look further. Like, even when I started as an intern, my next objective, it was always the next thing. So it was get a job or get in the freelance circuit. I did that. Then it was get a full-time job. That took 18 months. After that was to executive produce, did that in 6. And then it was 2 years to where I am now. And literally the day I got my job this time, I already sat down and wrote my goals out for what the next thing was. And that next thing for me personally is, and I don't mind saying it in public because you have to say it and preach it until you get there, is to make the step to America. And that's always been a dream of mine. I think it'll be an incredible step. They're such a big fish in terms of the ponds of TV industry and broadcast production, but you have to aim high. And that's the next step for me now, is how do I make that jump and make myself appealing? And if you're not setting goals, again, I thought about time, and I do hate that saying you only live once, but there's no point in resting on your laurels. You don't learn. It's the same as college. Like similarly, you have to keep pushing on and getting out of your comfort zone. Because if you don't, Danielle, again, you might can attest this, it can get quite boring quite fast if you're just doing the same thing over and over and over again. You don't get to progress, learn, and sort of just better yourself and better your life and better your role. And that's something I've always done, is look at least 2 years ahead.
I'd agree with that, and I think there's no harm in sort of setting goals. I think that as long as they're realistic, it's probably one of the main things. But I actually think little steps can help you get to your bigger goals anyway. And I do think some of it does come from your personality. So I am someone who does get quite bored quite easily, and I'll openly admit that. And what that tends to mean is that I tend to always be looking for something else. And it doesn't mean a new role or anything like that. It just means that I always want something to be doing, or something to be progressing with, or I want to help someone get somewhere. So at the moment, you know, there are students obviously that I'm around that are, you know, trying to break into certain markets, and I'm trying to use my connections to be able to do that. And, you know, I literally, you know, called a student last night because someone, you know, said, do you know anybody who you know, wants this opportunity? And that feels really nice to be able to do that. But what it also does is it kind of puts me in a certain light with that person, that actually my judgment is good, and you know, I can recommend people that are good people to do certain roles, and then you never know what that's going to bring off the back of it. And that's something that I've noticed, because, you know, academia wasn't the place for me, I thought at the beginning. But actually, all the experiences that I've gained just through academia, which relate to, you know, writing particular ways and the way you think and being very research orientated, has led to opportunities where, you know, I do quite a lot of content development now that's away from the institute I work for. It's nothing to do with Man United, but it's an opportunity that's come and been built from my experiences, that I just sometimes think other avenues will sort of shoot off the initial ideas. As long as you keep trying and just thinking about how you can instill what you have to offer. And a key takeaway is never undervalue yourself. You'll have a lot to offer, and it's just about packaging that right. In essence, you're essentially trying to market yourself, and doing that in the best way possible.
Exactly. Backing yourself and being strategic about how you implement that. So this for everyone. We'll start with you, Danielle, I suppose, since Owen went first last time. What's the hardest part of your job?
I would say the hardest part of the job is when you have a very strong gut feeling about a player, and you feel like you're pushing and pushing and pushing, but there doesn't seem to be any movement. That's probably the most difficult part, because that's when you start to potentially second guess yourself. And I know David mentioned it earlier about the whole imposter syndrome. That's when those types of things start to creep in, because it's like, well, why aren't you listening? And it might be that, you know, at that moment in time, they don't need that particular player at that particular age in that particular position. It could be that they've, you know, because in professional football and academies, you can only have so many players in your academy. So maybe we're just a bit full. And, you know, you'd like to think that if there's someone absolutely excelling, that room would be made. But equally, you know, not everything is as straightforward as that. You know, it's like I said before, there's a process involved. It's not just one person going, I think we should take that person, and then no one's not listening to you, and you're thinking, well, why not? Why we're not taking them? It's a bigger process, and I'm essentially just one cog in a massive machine. So it's that's probably the hardest part for me.
I can imagine. And for you, Owen?
I was trying to think, as Danielle was talking there, the best way to sort of summarize it. And the cog in a machine is similar in this industry as well, maybe on a smaller scale, but the 3 C's, I suppose, is the best way to do it. Communication, the hardest part of it is communication, confidence and criticism, and those kind of all come together as one. But in my job in particular, like the logistics involved in a show are a lot more than I would even bore you to death with talking about. But there's the best part is 60 people at a stadium working on for that one broadcaster, between cameras and rigging people and lighting and like even going down to generators and satellites and sound people and all this stuff. It's bananas. And communicating is something that you really have to learn quickly. Danielle said it, to be able to communicate clearly is so important the further you go on, and even learning how to email properly and communicate via email is so important. Because in some instances like that's can be your first impression to people, and tone is a very important thing off emails. And if you're emailing looking for internships or looking to get involved in something, and that's your only way of communicating, you have to be able to communicate that properly and make sure you come across the way you want to come across. And so that's definitely something so important. And I always sort of pride myself on, if we have a show on a Saturday and I start on the Monday, I want everybody to rock up the 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours before we go on air, that everyone knows what they're doing. And that comes from a lot of hard work and emails and phone calls and pre-planning. And the next one would be confidence. I would never say I was not confident, but when you get into something like a new industry, or when you start off again, going back to internship, it's very daunting. Like, you're talking to some serious people who, again, not to be degrading again, but you're low on the totem pole, and you're boxing above your weight in some respects early on, because you're just trying to play catch up. So the ability to be calm and like a sponge, like I was saying, and then be confident when you're talking and presenting and making your piece, or as Danielle said, if you're proposing for a player or something like that, is so important. And it kind of correlates with the communication. And then criticism, it's the one thing, especially working with RTE as a national broadcaster, I was probably unaware of. Air Sport was behind the paywall. We were always sort of criticised, but for the most part we were actually applauded for our efforts and working on small budgets, etc. But working for a national broadcaster, you're in the spotlight. You're getting, like, we had a game there, Munster-Leinster, where we peaked at over 1 million people watching it, and it gets pretty scary in terms of if you think that way, and you get a lot of criticism. The one thing is, you can't take it personally. You cannot take criticism personally, even if it's meant in a person, even if it's slanderous and it is aimed at you personally, because it will really affect you and the job you're in. And I work with a lot of people. I've worked with a lot of people that had serious egos, and they would say things that aren't nice to you, to be frank. And if you take that personally, you'll crumble. So the ability to take that in, and when it's constructive, take that in. You kind of have to figure out what's what, and how, again, tone and communication and confidence is so important. But to be able to take that in and learn from it is so crucial. It's how I've really sort of gone up through the layers, is learning from many mistakes I made, and that constructive criticism and finding out that it's constructive and not take it personally is so important. But they're really challenging aspects of, I think, any job, but specifically mine.
There's some really, really good insights and lessons there, Owen. Thank you. This next one for you, Danielle, I think we can answer very quickly. I believe you're just on the men's side, isn't it? You don't scout for the female side.
Yeah, just the male side. I think the female side at Man United is obviously up and coming, and they've sort of got their own network of scouts, but it's nowhere near the extent or the size of the male side. And it's, I'm sure people can imagine that the money plowed into the male side of football is a lot more than females, unfortunately, at the moment. So I think that's part of the reason why.
Okay. And for the final question for you, Danielle, I think it's the final question of the evening as well. I'm going to combine what the two Declans have asked, because they're quite similar. So do you tend to use a lot of software and reviewing data, or is it more about observation? So basically, as a scout, are you more data driven, or is it more observational, kind of by eye?
So for me personally, it's observation based. I'm very much on the ground, an on the ground scout. So I'm sort of out at games, actually watching the players. And especially when you're looking at younger players, there's no data that exists that you can physically get your hands on. There's a certain level. I mean, you're not allowed to get, specific data points on younger players. So it's not even available, even if we could. So for me, it's very much observation based, but there is a role to play with data. It just necessarily wouldn't be within my remit. It would be probably the recruitment analyst would be looking at the data. So if we've obviously got an older player where data is available and, it's in a platform like Y-Scout, for example, then the recruitment analyst will be looking through that data to kind of confirm or I guess go against what's been said from the scouts that have watched the performances. So it's there to sort of back up and correlate what's been said rather than it being primarily data driven in terms of decisions being made purely based upon that.
Okay, fantastic. Still great to hear that. I won't say old school, that's probably wrong, but more the human-based interactions are still valued so highly. So I think we're going to start to conclude now. So I'd like to thank, firstly, everyone that attended. We obviously can't run these webinars without people showing up and asking such great questions. But I'd like to give a big thank you to Owen, Joe, and Danielle for some great conversations and great insights tonight. And I think great role models and examples for what a combination of hard work, bravery, and confidence, and as well for backing yourselves and putting in the hard work and not being, I won't say not scared, because we all maybe are scared when we make those brave leaps, but to have the bravery to do it in the first place. So thank you very much, guys. For anyone that is interested in any of the courses we do here at Portobello, or even just want to have a chat about whether these type of courses could potentially suit you, do book in for a call with Joe. I can promise she's very friendly and will help you in any way she can. So our details are in the comment section. All the information can be found on our websites, and I do believe everyone should receive an email following this with some of the information then you need as well. So again, thanks to all the speakers and to everyone that attended tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.